Good morning, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today for our session on media and PR for small business. My name's Kristy. I am an advisor and a presenter for Business Station as part of the Digital Solutions program. Now, we're going to go through a range of things today, and I would really encourage you to reach out using the Q&A or the chat functionality and ask questions along the way. Otherwise, I'll stay on at the end for a few minutes as well to answer any questions that you might have. Now, in terms of what we're going to actually cover today, we are going to talk about the importance of public relations, particularly for small businesses such as yours. We'll define media and PR and talk about media relations and sort of work out, define how that fits into things as well. We'll talk about generating a bit of publicity, working with influencers. We'll really go through the customer journey and how this all ties in. And then we will touch on social media and your PR strategy with social media as well. So first of all, to get us started, talking about media, well, essentially media is the main means of mass communication. So information is delivered to the public, and it's normally done through things like newspapers, televisions, radio, and of course, a range of different ways online. Now, when you think of the term media, you think traditional media or news outlets, but it's really not the case in this day and age. Media is so much more, and there's an unbelievable number of media outlets that each individual consumer is going to experience on a daily basis. Of course, there's social media, there's influential bloggers, there's YouTube influencers, there's online publications and podcasts, and all of these things can be harnessed to help publicize your business. In the more traditional sense, journalists and reporters are the people that write or present the news and feature news stories as well, and then editors control the content. But what we know about the media now is that editors don't always control the final content. Really, everybody controls the content. And it's very much been handed over to consumers to assist in that control of content as well. Okay, so what you see on your screen now is what we call a PESO model. This is a media model strategy. Now, PESO stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned. Now, it's really important to understand that what you're doing in PR, in media, or even in marketing, and really link it into where it fits within this model, because you do have to use a variety of strategies across a range of different mediums to get that cut through or get that reach. In the past, paid media was really the primary focus of advertising. Earned media was the primary focus of PR, and then you didn't really have much going on by way of shared and owned. It wasn't really anyone's focus, but now there's so much crossover that each element has to be a focus in every business, no matter how big or small. So just to go over what these are and explain them a little bit more, paid is pretty straightforward. It's advertising. It could be by way of just a straight ad. It could be advertorials. There may be sponsorships or sponsored content, which is content that you pay for. It might include ads on the radio. It might include television or in print, as well as any other paid activities like online ads, which is your pay-per-click, Google AdWords. Even social media advertising for Facebook and Instagram, sponsored posts, banner ads, so anything that you pay for. Earned is news coverage. Now, earned media is when you've earned the opportunity, and often you will earn this opportunity through good media relations, which we're going to talk about in just a second, to appear as some sort of news story. Media will be in that specific publication as press coverage as opposed to an ad. And now if it's in traditional media, then more than likely they also have an online outlet, so you'll get things like backlinks. It could exist online. It could be by way of reviews. It could be industry specific coverage, or even awards and that kind of thing. But because of its association with being a little bit more trusted, earned media has the potential to reach a lot more consumers than any paid or owned media. You've got shared media next. Shared media is essentially social media or user-generated content. So it's not created by you as such. It's created by your people or the public. and it's constantly evolving. So that's really the most important thing to understand about that is it does constantly evolve. What happens here is largely a result of your marketing and your customer service. So a good combination of both. You really can't afford any negative relations with your customers at any stage of their purchase cycle, because it will come out in your shared media space, and it's so crucial that you get that right. That element is what consumers really believe in terms of, believe the content that they're reading and rely on heavily to make decisions as well. Then you've got your owned, which is your owned assets. Now, owned media is content that you've created or anything that you have full control over. So it could be your website or your blog. You may have produced ebooks or white papers, presentations. So you will know that it's owned because you will fully control the content and its distribution. So if you can add to it, if you can edit it, if you could delete the content, then you probably own it. Now, each of these 4 categories is a lot more effective when they're used in conjunction with one another than they are in isolation. So keep this model in mind. As a starting point, have a think about what you're actually doing now in each of those areas. We will refer back to this peso model, but what we want to achieve is be doing something in each of these areas as a starting point, and then eventually get to the point where you're doing everything you possibly can in each aspect of media to get full reach, considering these 4 elements of the peso model. All right, now we're looking at public relations in terms of defining the term, what it is. Public relations is really a strategic communication process, and throughout that process, you build mutually beneficial relationships between your organization or your small business and the public. So to simplify what PR is, I think it's having a good strategy plus having the ability to storytell. Now, as a small business, or a lot of small businesses, I guess, don't think that they are in the business or in the need of public relations, but you absolutely are. If you think back to that model, the peso model that we just had a look at, this is really your earned, and it can cross over into your shared components. So it is very, very important. And I believe that PR is crucial to the success of every business, no matter how big or small. You can have the biggest advertising budget in the world, but if you just don't have the public relations side of things to back it up, it really won't matter. The difference between a small business, which tends to be more budget conscious, and a larger business is that you really have to take a DIY approach to mastering your own public relations, because you don't generally have the luxury of hiring a PR firm to do it for you. Okay, so having a look at this image, I just like this shot because it is really interesting to look at how the media space has evolved, and it kind of puts things into perspective a little bit. So in the past, brands very much controlled the message. Customers became very passive receptors. If you had a good publicist, they became a bit of a spin doctor, and through their media relations or good relationships with the media, they were able to get a message out to customers that, like I said, being a passive receptor, they just believed what they read or what they were told. However, now there are a lot of simultaneous communications. Traditional media are just one outlet for customers, but customers are a lot more empowered. So they're kind of telling your story for you in a lot of cases. Everyone owns your brand message, and it's up to you to get the delivery right, set the standard, and then have everybody telling that story for you. Now, generating positive media coverage or publicity is a core function of a public relations professional, but it's just one of many functions that you need to consider in PR. There has to be research and strategy and messaging and a lot of other activities that go into a successful PR program to make sure that everyone that you see, every individual that you see on that the right-hand side of that screen is really singing the same song or, communicating the same message. Publicists just produce a transaction or a specific result, like an article or, coverage on a television show or something like that. Whereas looking after your own PR or being more of a PR professional yourself, you'll get positive results across all forms of media, social and traditional, as well as online. So hopefully that makes sense. But the key message here is that your customers are empowered more than they have ever been in the past. Now, from a publicity perspective, to get publicity, you have to have and you have to build strong media relations. Now, building relations or relationships with the media is crucial because journalists will enjoy dealing with people that can assist them in their work or make their job that bit easier by providing them a good newsworthy story or something that's going to be well received amongst their audience. But what you have to keep in mind is the media is so fast paced that the journalists really don't have time to research stories for themselves or go out looking for things to cover. You really want to, like I said, assist them in their work. If you can provide them with an easy story, then it's going to be a win for them and ultimately a win for you. What you do need to consider is that there are a few different elements to the media. You've got a news editor or a news journalist. They're going to look for straightforward news, like new information. It could be about something that has or that will happen. Whereas you've then got feature editors or feature journalists, and they'll be more interested in an in-depth story that tends to be more topic specific. So you obviously have to understand that as a first point. Some other tips for building media relations. I think the first and most important step is to develop a news sense. Know what information each outlet presents and what type of items might be of interest to them in the future. So you would have to be, I guess, have a good understanding of who their audience is, it could be audience, it could be listeners, it could be readers, it could be followers. Look at things that they've published in the past and determine what they like to write about normally. Obviously, you have that understanding of the difference between news and feature journalists. You also would want to be clear on whether the publication or the media outlet that you're focusing on is consumer focused or if it's trade focused. Consumer media will look for stories that appeal to the public or the end customer, whereas trade media will be interested in material that is of interest to the industry. So really understand who the journalist or who the publication is speaking to, because they're always going to be looking for stories that appeal to their audience. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is developing a news sense means that you need to really engage with the various media outlets yourself in terms of becoming a reader, becoming a viewer, becoming a follower, just to build that news sense over time. Once you've defined what sort of media outlets are best suited to your target market and have the same audience as your target market, you then have to know things like lead times and deadlines. For example, news items for print, radio, and television generally have short lead times and they can appear quickly. So something could happen today and it's, on the news by the night or it's in the paper the next day. Social media is very instantaneous. So that's it's happening now, then it's published now. Then you've got things like feature articles that are planned well in advance, and it could be months before, a particular media outlet produces a feature story that's topic specific. So really understand the lead times of the various outlets that you're looking to get coverage in. Knowing specific people really helps. Obviously, getting the names of the journalists and their contact details, finding out how they best like to receive media releases or information. So building yourself a bit of a database. That can be really difficult, and probably the most complex component of that is really getting to know who the people are. You can use things like, obviously, as you're getting a news sense, you might see particular names popping up as the author of various articles or publications. You might then look on LinkedIn and try and establish a connection there, or you might develop, some relationships through networking events and that kind of thing. But do start to build yourself a little bit of a database and then keep it as up to date as possible. Once you get to the point of providing information to your contacts, make sure it's accurate. It has to be accurate information. A lot of the time, journalists or any media aren't actually fact-checking. Sometimes they're just producing what you tell them. And again, that comes down to times. Everything's very fast-paced. also, if you're the contact on a media release, make sure that you're very responsive to that. Now, we'll talk about writing media releases shortly, but just in terms of, getting back to people, the last thing you want is to issue a fantastic media release. It gets some attention, but you're just not there to answer any questions, and therefore you miss an opportunity. So always be accurate with any information provided, whether that's information in a media release, information about a story, or contact information. I would also say, to build media relations, simply invite them to see or experience your product or service if and when it's appropriate. Now, if you're having a launch or you've got an event or something like that, then it's always great to invite media. But even just sometimes it's appropriate to do so in your general day-to-day as well. The other top tip, I guess, in terms of media relations, and this really comes down to where you're based, but get to know your local media. Local media, like your community newspapers, or and if you're regional, this becomes very much more important. But make an effort to get to know them, because they're always hungry for news. So it differs a little bit to mainstream media in that local media are looking for stories, information, people that are relevant to local areas. So if you can provide them with a story that's relevant, particularly small business, there's always a bit of a good feeling when it comes to helping small business and sharing the stories of small business owners and that kind of thing. So really get to know who your local and the smaller media outlets are, because they can be a lot more targeted and hungry for news, as I said. Once you have established your relationships with media, make regular contact, keep in touch with them. Don't do it too often to annoy them, but often enough so that they don't forget who you are. And if they're changing, moving roles, they think to let you know, or you're included in their database as much as they're included in yours. Now, all of these things and the sort of items that I've mentioned here to build media relations will really help you when it comes to getting publicity. You have to keep in mind that publicity is just a tactic. Public relations does require that planned strategy. It does take time, and it does consider all elements of that peso media model. So do keep that in mind. But building media relations is absolutely crucial, and a crucial step of PR. Okay, so still looking at that earned space, now generating publicity. It's all about spreading the word about your business through these non-advertising channels and earning the media. So through your good media relations, you know who the media are. You've got a good relationship with them. You know what their audiences are, and you're confident that it matches who your target market is. But you still need to keep in mind that they want newsworthy stories that are provided in a relevant time frame, that are different or unique, perhaps have some kind of human interest element, and you're going to have to obviously have some eye-catching or emotive visuals that you can send off with this. So whatever it is, it has to be something that the media can report on that perks the interest of their readers, their viewers, their listeners, their audience. Okay, so that is really a key thing. Once you've determined that, you can communicate with them in a number of ways. One is writing a media release, and that's kind of the most common way to communicate with the media. We're going to talk about the structure of a media release shortly. You may also produce a newsletter. Now, a lot of businesses will produce an e-newsletter, for example, that goes out to their database, but don't forget to also communicate this to your media database. You just don't know what they might be working on or what sort of stories they're looking at. So it doesn't always have to be a media release. Definitely incorporate a media database to your normal EDMs. In both cases, like I said, you'll need some kind of images or video that really adds to the content that you're speaking about. So make sure that you've got those visuals as well. And then you can look at distributing. So you could distribute yourself. You could use online news centers to distribute stories as well. So the other thing is social media. Social media is a great way to communicate with the media. You would have to be sharing content to the relevant either media outlet or journalists. You might want to tag them. You might want to use hashtags that you know that they're searching through. So certainly incorporate that as well. whether or not, and any of these things that I've mentioned here can be done in conjunction with each other. So you can write a media release, but also put information in your newsletter, plus do a post on social media about it, or you could do each sort of in isolation. Okay, so now we are going to have a bit of a look at writing a media release. This tends to be the best way or the most common way to generate publicity or to get the attention of a journalist. Now, a media release is a document that you send out to the media that details anything that could be classified as news, so to speak. Journalists will take that media release, and if they find it interesting, they'll write an article about it. Now, depending on the journalist and the publication, a lot of the time they will publish what they read and fact check later. So what content you have in your media release becomes absolutely crucial. Now, you may have seen this on social media. A lot of the time it becomes the public correcting journalists or media outlets. And that really happens because the news world is so fast paced. So they'd rather be first to publish something, even if it's a little bit inaccurate, than waste time checking facts and have another media outlet publish the information first. So it becomes really crucial that your media release is extremely factual and doesn't have any errors in it. So if you've got something newsworthy and someone picks it up, the best thing about it is that the promotion that your business is going to get will be absolutely free. If you think of the circumstance where it's a newspaper or magazine publication, generally speaking, they'll also have online and social media outlets. So, either a website and social media that they'll feature the stories in as well. So it's more than just print. So you get free marketing through that media avenue. Generally, you'd get backlinks from their website to yours, which can be great for SEO. And overall, it's just a really good way to build your brand and gain credibility for your business to your consumers, but also within your industry. It is very competitive. So you have to make sure that your media release is one that grabs the attention of journalists and really stands out. So I find that the best media releases are written in this inverted pyramid format that you see on your screen. You have to start with a headline, which isn't mentioned on that pyramid, but your headline is generally about 5 words. 5 to 7 words is sort of the recommendation. And it will be very catching. So it's not going to just be company XYZ media release. It will be a few words that are really going to hook the journalist in. That then becomes your subject line on your emails and that kind of thing. Then you've got the lead. Now, this is the most newsworthy information. The who, what, where, why, when. And this is really a hook to draw people in that little bit further. Then you've got your body. Now, the body is important details, and it may be the main argument or the main component of your story. Normally, you would have evidence to back that up and quotes from a third party. Now, your quotes are really important because they really do give credibility to the entire media release. So keep that in mind. You always be looking for a quote from a third party that is authoritative to the situation. So let's say you're launching a new product, you might have an industry, it could be a celebrity, it could be an senior industry executive, it could be your CEO, and you could be the CEO, but obviously your media release is written in third person. So you might describe there how, the CEO, Mr. John Smith, has said that this is the most exciting product that company XYZ has ever launched, and it's the first of its type in the Southern Hemisphere, or something like that. So even though it's you writing about your own business, it's written in third person and it's giving credibility to the story overall. So those quotes become really important. In terms of quotes, it's also crucial that you get approval from whoever you're quoting. Now, if that's somebody that has genuinely said the words to you, just ask if they're happy to be quoted, and then obviously you can quote them in the media. In some cases, you might contact someone and say, look, I'm writing a media release. I'd really like your quote. This is what we're doing. I'd love a quote from you. Are you happy to be quoted? And they'll give you a statement. So whichever way you go about it, make sure that you do have approval. Then the last section is the tail. So this would be any extra information that's related to the story. You might put a bit of background information on your business or any extra content. So it could be, you know, when the business was established, how often you operate, whatever that might be. You would then generally have the contact details for media contacts. And again, I did say this earlier, but make sure that person is very responsive. If it's not yourself, make sure they know that they're being listed as the media contact on a media release, so that when the media do contact them, they've got, you know, they know that what the nature of the media release is about, and that they're sort of being expecting to be contacted. So that's a media release. Now, media releases are difficult to write if you're not a writer or if you haven't written one before. If you're in marketing, or even if you're a business owner, they can become difficult because your natural instinct is to make it salesy, whereas a media release is more of a factual document. It's not designed to be a salesy document. So you might have to rewrite it a few times. As I said, it is always written in third person, so keep that in mind. And generally, this structure is a very solid one to follow. I would just be really careful about going back, making sure that it's accurate, and making sure it doesn't read like an ad, because that's the last thing you want. It is a factual statement. You don't want it to read like an ad. A lot of times, a professional journalist would rewrite the story based on your information. So generally, the process would be they'd receive the media release, read it, go, yep, that sounds like something I want to write about. They'd contact the media contact on that media release. They would ask for more information, and they would write a story as their own based on this factual information. That's traditional process. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you never hear from a journalist. They've picked up your media release and they've just published what you've written. So you have to have enough information in there if that happens, not too much information and not written in a way that you're writing it for them. So it's a fine balance, and it does take a few goes if it's not something that you're used to. Okay, so let's assume you found something interesting to say. You've written your media release, and now it's time to get that media release out. Now, to get good reach with your media releases, you have to have that excellent database. So going back to what we're talking about building media relations, I would have an excellent database of industry-specific media, and also media that is directly related to your type of business or that would appeal to your target market. Now, that side of it, the building media relations and coming up with this perfect database, is the part that takes time. As a starting point, I would consider distributing to local newspapers. Like I said, local newspapers tend to be a little bit more hungry for content that's relevant to local businesses in a local area, so that can be a good win. Local broadcasters, TV and radio, if that's relevant. I would look at industry-specific publications. Now, whilst industry-specific publications tend to produce stories, articles, publications that are relevant to trade, they may have consumer database as well. But in any case, even if it's going out to trade, it's creating awareness and building credibility amongst your, fellow industry colleagues. If you're a member of a chamber of commerce, that can always be a good place to get your media release out via, or any other relevant membership organisations that you're a part of. And this could be at a regional, it could be a state, or it could be a national level. You can also get greater distribution through media agencies like the AAP, Australian Associated Press, or if you pay for distribution, obviously you can get it out that way. In terms of sending it out, always make sure that the release is addressed to the right person at the relevant media outlet. Otherwise, they might not receive it. Now, you know who that person is because you've developed this amazing database. But if you're not sure for any reason, just mark it to the attention of the person's title. So it could be food editor, for example. But you would also have established an understanding of what sort of departments they have because you've developed this new sense. Now, email distribution of media releases is very widely accepted. Where possible, I would always say to paste your release into the body of the email rather than adding it as an attachment. So that just eliminates another step. The content's right there, so it makes it nice and simple. In terms of how you send it to who, you may establish this as part of developing your database. So let's say that you've met someone that works for the relevant media outlet that you're looking to appeal to. You've had a conversation along the line and said, yeah, always send media releases this way or upload them here, then that would be listed on your database. But if not, default to email distribution. It is good to know if anyone has any specific requirements, and then perhaps even follow it up with a phone call afterwards to make sure that they've received it. Always send it with images as well. Now, you might not want to send the highest res image because it could be too big in terms of a file, but you could always send a medium res image and just say, look, for high res images, please contact us. That's a great way to kind of keep an eye on who's actually picking up the story as well, or even have a link to download a high res version of an image. Just as I said, if you are a member of any organization, the other thing to keep in mind is they might have their own publications, but they may also have access to the press. So they may have some good media relations themselves that would help you get coverage to the relevant in the relevant media outlet. If you're sending by email and you're sending to lots of different contacts, if you are sending them in one email, always use that BCC function, the blind carbon copy. That will mean that you're not, sending a long list of journalists that appear on each other's recipient mail, which is very, very bad etiquette and will frustrate people pretty quickly. Also keep in mind that if you do have multiple outlets you want to send your media release to, you may need 2 or 3 versions of the same release. So you might want to have a version that goes to your local newspaper, for example, your local media outlet, and that talks about your business, you're launching a new event and how good it is for the local economy, etc., etc. Or you might have that same media release going to a national news and outlet, and then you might talk about, how easy, how exciting the region is, for example, and how this event really gives exposure to the region. So it could be the same story, but just tweaked and adapted to suit the news outlet or the media outlet that you're appealing to. But absolutely, as I said, use that subject line, which to really get the journalist's interest. Now, I mentioned the headline before should be 5 to 7 words. The perfect opportunity and the perfect, a concept here is to use the subject line, use the headline as a subject line. So they should be the same. So many times I'll get an email and it will be literally, and the subject line, company XYZ media release. And that's a bit, do I want to read their media release? Don't know if I have time. But if it was the title of the story, the headline of the story, it could be a lot more exciting. So it is certainly good practice to use this headline of the story as the headline of the email as well. All right, so going back to that PESO model now, publicity is what we've been talking about when it comes to media releases and coverage in publications. So that's just really about earned media. It does go into that shared media space as well when things start to go online and on social media channels of media outlets. Now, public relations, as I mentioned, is about all media. So you have to think about PR as literally fitting in with each element of this PESO model. And it has to be incorporated into your entire marketing strategy. So now we're going to talk about some other elements of PR. We'll talk about influencers. Now, influencers sit in both the shared and the paid space. So some people have, a lot of small businesses have had experience in working with influencers in the past. I do hear a lot of horror stories in terms of influencers. And that's why I think it's important for us to discuss it today, because I think it is a fabulous form of marketing if it's done in the right way. So you may already know the term social influencers. It really isn't anything new. They have been around in various forms forever. So think about back in the day where, even 100 years ago, there would be a big event and certain people would be invited because of the credibility that they held or the attention that they would get by attending an event. So things like that have existed forever, and this really is no different. The term influencer refers to people who possess this significant credibility or considerable reach within a target audience. Now it largely revolves around the internet, of course, and influencer marketing is very popular, and it can be a really effective form of marketing, and it can be very cost effective as well. A great way to generate positive PR, because influencers really do have the power to affect purchasing decisions of others, and they are able to do this because of perhaps their authority, their knowledge. It could be their position in our society, or in a particular industry, or it could just be because of their relationship with their audience or their followers in a distinct niche that they're actively engaging with. So the size of the following and and that kind of thing will largely depend on the size of their topic or what their niche area is. Now, influencers can include, and there's a range. It's not just Instagram, as you might think, but influencers could be topic experts, they could be thought leaders or brand advocates, and they may come in the shape of bloggers, YouTubers, podcasters, or just your social media influencers. But they could also be celebrities. They could be journalists themselves that become influencers because they are key opinion leaders. Or even academics or professional advisors or any other industry experts, really. So they're essentially people with an above average influence on their particular audience. So there's some keywords in that. But before we sort of go into that and some guidelines around working with influencers, I just want to say that I think social media has really devalued this form of PR, because there tends to be a number of fakes or wannabe influencers that will tell you that they have a huge following or promise you lots and don't deliver on it. So they may just want something for nothing in order to cover your product, and you really don't get that return. So what we're going to go through now is going to establish a bit of a criteria or some guidelines around how to choose that right influencer for your business. Now, true influencer marketing, in my opinion, should be directed by you. So you approach them, not the other way around. So it does involve leveraging influencers in your content marketing as much as in theirs. So you want whatever is produced by way of deliverables by the influencer, you want to use on your website, on your socials, on your blogs, as well as what they post on theirs. So it can have heaps of benefits, like increased traffic to your website. It could be new leads, and hopefully, ultimately, the goal is customers. So keep that in mind. Now, that works because the audience of these influencers trust their friends, colleagues, experts more than they trust advertising. And that's the way these stories are pitched. They're pitched in an organic way as opposed to in an advertising way. Now, if you appreciate that fact and devote time and resources to finding the right influencer, then it's going to really work for you a lot better. Influencers who devote time and resources to creating these authentic relationships with their audience will be a lot more successful as well. So really choosing that right influencer is the key to your success. Their audience has to match yours. It's absolutely crucial that who they're speaking to is exactly who you want to be walking through your doors or purchasing your product or service. Now, I think there's a bit of a key criteria to determine that. And to determine if it's going to work for both your company and for the influencer. Now, that first of all is going to be the audience demographics. So who is, I should say, the influencer talking to? Who are their audience by way of straight demographics, geographic location, age brackets, interests, that kind of thing? Do they match your specific target market? So as an influencer, I might come to you and say, I have got 100,000 people that follow my page. This is everything I can do for you. The very first thing you would need to do is have a look at who those people are. So if they're not the type of people that would buy your product or service, it doesn't matter how many followers they have. There's no point telling a room full of people that aren't interested about your product, if that makes sense. So audience is absolutely crucial. And as I said, I think it should be directed by you. So you should be doing your research and know who the influencers are in your industry or that talk directly to your target market. Obviously, you need to know what the influencer is going to want, what's in it for them. They're not going to work for free. So is it a payment? Is it a free product or service? Or is it a combination of both? So what's the value to the influencer? Obviously, if that works for you, so if the audience is right and you know what it's going to cost or you know what the outlay is going to be, I would have a look at other things like the size of their audience. Size alone isn't enough. You're going to really have to look at engagement. Look at their past posts. Look at things like likes, comments, shares, and look for true and genuine conversation. Likes are very easy to get. Followers are very easy to get. In fact, you can buy these things. So, you know, it's very easy to kind of fake that. But true engagement should be visible. And what that would look like is, let's say, you know, you see this a lot in fashion and beauty industries where you've got an influencer who does have a great audience of people that may seriously be interested in your product or service. They might do a post, a series of posts. It could be real stories. It could be, you know, whatever what shape or form that takes. Then people, their audience will actively reach out and start giving them questions about the product. Oh, when I use this is my experience. What did you find? Or how does it feel when you do this? And, you know, you look for the genuine questions, that true engagement, and then look for the response from the influencer. So are they actively engaging with their audience? One thing that is a big red flag is if the audience is trying to engage with them, but they're not responding, or if there's no engagement, if there's no comments, if there's no shares on their post and you've just got that like. So really look out for those red flags. That engagement is the number one factor that you'll be looking at. Obviously, you've got to look at their quality of their writing style and their photography and make sure that it matches how you would normally talk to your target market. You might also look out for their connection to other influencers. Do a bit of a Google, have a look at other influencers and see if they're connected. Are they respected and are they known within the industry, I should say. I think it's a fantastic form of PR if you use it right, if you do your homework. So keep that in mind, absolutely consider it, make sure that it all stacks up, and just make sure that you've got some kind of clear contract or agreement in place that clearly states what the value is to them in terms of what it's going to cost you. So what's the outlay and what are the deliverables, specific deliverables with clear timeframes, and making sure that all of the content that's produced can be used on your own channels as well to get you more reach. Okay, so thinking about how else you can generate good PR. Well, of course, from your customers is a key area to generate good PR. But to get good PR from customers and valuable PR, you have to engage with them. 88% of people are influenced by reviews and online comments, which is all sitting in that shared space. So thinking about that, do you know what people are saying about you online? And are you already part of that conversation? Now, social pressure can tarnish your brand as quickly as you try and grow it because fingertips are always on the move. So a really key element of PR is that you are part of those conversations. Now, it could be someone waiting in line and they could be getting frustrated about service. They might quickly let their friends know or a wider community know on Facebook. You know, there's other review specific sites or industry specific review sites like TripAdvisor if it's tourism or Urban Spoon if it's food, as well as your Google business, your Facebook and those kind of reviews. So keep that in mind. Really keep an eye out. Make sure that you're actively getting those reviews online and responding to them and that you're part of that conversation. No business is perfect, so virtually everyone in any industry will have to deal with customer complaints at some point, but it is much easier to deal with them face-to-face before they make it online. So keep that in mind. How you handle a complaint when the person is with you will make all the difference as to whether or not it goes online. Now, what you often see is people that have a complaint in a face-to-face sense or with a product or service, and it's handled amazingly, they become the advocates online as well. So not only are you mitigating the risk of a bad review by handling a complaint well, but you're actually really increasing the chances of getting a positive review. There are reasons that businesses don't handle complaints well. Generally being too busy or being too defensive can be reasons. Sometimes, and you do see the defensive side of things with small businesses a lot, because we're small businesses passionate about products and services. Sometimes businesses just try too quickly to come up with a solution, so the person feels like they're being silenced as opposed to being heard. If you've got staff can be a bit unsure of procedures, or there might be a procedural breakdown, or they are even just intimidated by a lack of training. So make sure that your staff are well trained on complaint handling, and they know their levels of empowerment. They know what they can do to solve a particular problem, and at what point they need to escalate it to the next person. But any of those reasons that you don't handle complaints well can have a serious impact on that shared media and result in some serious negative PR, a lot of which haunts you for years, because, you know, once it goes online, it doesn't go away. So look for signs, look for cues, ask questions when your customers are with you to make sure that they're satisfied. You don't want them leaving you in a face-to-face sense unhappy. You want to be able to resolve any issues there and then. Sometimes it's the quiet ones that you have to worry about, that are more inclined to get online, I should say, and make those complaints, as opposed to raising any issues with you there and then. So keep an eye out for that as well. In terms of how you can help to bring positive PR from your customers, I think the key thing really is to engage with them. You have to engage with them online, offline, and really develop relationships with them to allow them to engage with you on social media, if that makes sense. So first of all, you need to listen to what is being said. Now, there's tools for social monitoring where you can track things like mentions, and you can track what your competitors are doing, or listen out for events. You can look at your own data analytics and that kind of thing, and reputation tools. But obviously listening to any reviews, whether that's Google, TripAdvisor, Facebook, however people are reviewing you, you need to be listening to what's going on. So monitoring is one thing. Monitoring kind of tells you what's being said, and listening, true listening, will tell you why it's being said. So keep an eye out for recurring comments or anything like that. That might be a really good indication that operationally things need to change. So listening is absolutely crucial. Talking to people is important. Talking to people in terms of, in a social media sense, with pictures, with responding to reviews, engaging with customers on social media. One thing I tend to see in the social media sense for business is that they'll have, you might develop all your posts. So you've scheduled all your posts for a month, and then when they go live, you're not actually there. So comments are going online and people are trying to engage, but you're not actually physically there to respond. So that talking element and engaging with customers on social media is absolutely crucial. You also want to talk with influencers and engage with influencers. You might monitor relevant blogs or communities and other social networks where you can have a bit of a voice from a business sense as well. Also talk to your customers when they're physically with you, and then encourage them to continue that conversation online. You might see them taking a photo of something that they're using, your product or service, and tell them where they can go online to talk, to continue your conversation with them there. And that sort of ties into the supporting. Direct people to the channels where they can talk to you. Give them links to your social online wherever you can, whether that's via your website or via email footers and that kind of thing. But also direct them to the channels when they're with you. Let's say you have a shop front. You might want to promote your hashtags and your social media handles, or where to review you there as well. Let them know how and where they can leave feedback, and make it very, very easy for them to find. And that gives you the ability to listen. So it is a cycle. If you support them and tell them how and where they can leave that feedback, you can then listen to the feedback and talk back to them. So it becomes very crucial, and it all ties in together. So that's the positive side. The negative side of things is crisis. A crisis may strike even if you've done absolutely everything right. But I have found through personal experience that the most effective way to get through a crisis is to have a plan before it strikes. Hopefully, and 9 times out of 10, a business would have a crisis plan and never have to use it, and that's ideal. But in your crisis plan, it is really important to establish who the spokesperson is for your company should a crisis arise. Be clear that the guidelines around communicating with customers and with the media are that you are doing so quickly, honestly, openly, and are as transparent as needed in the situation. Obviously, as part of that plan, you have to factor in that you have to keep employees and stakeholders informed. You also have to communicate with current and future customers as well as suppliers and keep them informed. You have to be updating people early and often in a crisis. And you may have to look at contacting the media or social media if it's, and posting on social media, I should say, if it's appropriate. Now, this really depends on what the crisis is, how involved you are. You know, it's very situation based and tailored around a situation. But at the very least, set out some guidelines for if there was a crisis, how would it be handled and who would be responsible at what point for what areas of the business. It will help you get through it a lot better, and it's something that you can communicate to staff as well. So keep that in mind. We've seen quite a few businesses involved in crisis situations as a result of COVID, for example, where, and I think that we're certainly past this, but it is something that may, you know, occur in the future, or I guess it's a good example of how you can have a crisis within your organizations. But things like when there were outbreaks at various businesses and, you know, the media were all over and showing signage of businesses, and businesses had to close for a period of time. And, you know, so there were those little crisis situations that were beyond the control of the business. And then sometimes there's larger ones, whether there's accident, incident, sometimes it's just a PR crisis in terms of, you know, I've seen it before with a restaurant provided a dish that a customer wasn't happy with. Customer didn't tell anybody at the time, but posted a image of it online, and it got a serious amount of attention. So it's something very, very minor that became a social media crisis. So thinking about how you would work through that. So the top recommendation is just to have a crisis plan that considers those elements that I mentioned, and hopefully you never have to use it. Okay, so we've just about come to the end of the webinar. I do hope it's given you a greater understanding of PR, that paid, the earned, the shared, and the owned elements, and that you're more confident to be able to build your brand across all areas. My top tips to build your brand are to always factor in the peso model and don't leave out any component. If you've got a gap in one of those 4 areas, then there is something missing. It's not a complete PR strategy. Media releases are very important. You do need to work on crafting compelling stories around new and interesting things that happen in your business. Aim for a target of at least a few per year if you can. So start to map that out and see what it looks like. I would always promote your story or your expertise and that of the others in your business. Now, you can do this in your owned, your earned, and your shared media, but try and make it personal. Tell your story and the story behind your brand. This is a really key area for small business, I think, and it's a missed opportunity in some cases. You know, every small business has a great story with some great people behind it. So try and promote that as much as you can and make it personal. For cheap and effective PR, look at sponsorship opportunities. Now, this could be participating in charitable and community events. It could be events that are relevant to your industry or to your business, but always make sure that the audience matches yours. So again, just think about if you're going into a room full of people and telling them about your product or service, you want to make sure they actually represent your customer base. So the type of people that would actually buy your product or service. I would certainly reach out to influencers in your industry or amongst your customer base. Influencers are fantastic, but like I said, and as we sort of discussed earlier, do your homework around that and make sure that it's a very planned approach. Don't get caught up in the numbers in terms of, you know, the number of followers, number of likes. Really look out for that engagement. Now, my last tip would be to use Google Alerts to track what's being said about you online as a PR sort of management tool. Now, Google Alerts are very easy to set up. You set them up in your Google account. You choose keywords that Google then reports on. So once it's set up, you'll get a notification via email anytime those keywords appear online. So make the keywords quite specific. You don't want them too generic, or you'll be getting sent a whole lot of irrelevant information. But at a bare minimum, look at your brand, your business name, so that anywhere your full business name is used online, you'll know about. So keep that in mind. Now, that is it from me. If anyone has any questions, I'll stay online now to answer them. We have just touched on PR. If you're wanting to know more, do keep in mind that you can book a one-on-one appointment with me or our range of advisors through the Digital Solutions Program. It's a Commonwealth government funded program. So reach out. You can get 3 hours of one-on-one mentorship for just $44, plus make up a training package with our range of workshops and webinars, and look at, like it says on our screen at the moment, a 7-hour package for just $44. There is a bit of eligibility around that. You have to have an ABN that's registered in WA, Queensland or NT. You have to be operating for profit and employ fewer than 20 full-time staff. So if that's you and you are wanting to discuss your business anymore and get that fantastic guidance and mentorship, please reach out. The link is on the screen now. But thanks a lot for joining me today. If you've got any questions, shoot them through now. But otherwise, hopefully we meet again soon.